The first thing I saw was my own front door swinging open on my security app. Not from the wind, not from a break-in, from my own homeowners association. I was parked in an unmarked federal vehicle nearly 2 counties away when my phone vibrated with a live notification. The Oak Hollow Estates community page had started streaming. The title flashed across my screen. Emergency compliance entry, resident violation. My stomach dropped. The camera panned slowly across my driveway, lingered on the American flag mounted beside the garage, then settled on my front porch. And there she was, Linda Holloway, perfectly styled, perfectly composed, smiling into the lens like she was hosting a neighborhood cooking show instead of invading someone's home. For full transparency, she chirped, "We're entering the property now." Then I watched her nod to 2 volunteers, and they kicked in my door. The sound echoed through my phone speaker. Wood splintering. Claire's voice somewhere inside the house. Linda stepping over the threshold like she owned the place. They thought they were enforcing rules. They thought they were making an example out of me. What they didn't know was that they had just live-streamed themselves committing a federal offense in my home against the wrong man. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? When Claire and I moved into Oak Hollow Estates in Briar Glen, Tennessee, it felt like we had finally found somewhere we could stay for a while. After years of relocating because of my job, the idea of a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and predictable routines sounded almost luxurious. Oak Hollow looked perfect on the surface. Every lawn cut to the exact same height, every mailbox identical, painted the same approved shade of black. Not a single trash can left out a minute longer than necessary. It felt orderly, controlled. Safe. That should have been my first warning. Claire loved it immediately. She talked about finally planting roses along the walkway and hosting barbecues without worrying about packing boxes again in 6 months. Neighbors waved when we unloaded the moving truck. A few even brought over welcome baskets with store-bought cookies and neatly printed HOA guidelines. Pamphlets tucked inside like polite little reminders. I kept my background simple when people asked what I did. "I work in federal investigations," I'd say. That was enough to shut down follow-up questions. Most people nodded awkwardly and changed the subject. I preferred it that way. My job required discretion. The less attention I drew, the better. Linda Holloway made sure attention found me anyway. She introduced herself during our second week. Perfect posture, perfect hair, perfect smile that looked rehearsed in a mirror. "Welcome to Oak Hollow," she said, extending a manicured hand. "I'm the HOA president. We take pride in maintaining standards here." She handed me a binder thick enough to qualify as a textbook. Tabs labeled landscaping, vehicle regulations, exterior modifications, community conduct. It was color-coded and laminated. "We run a tight ship," she added lightly. "It keeps property values strong." I flipped through it later that night. It was strict, but not outrageous. Lawn height had a precise limit. Exterior paint colors had to match an approved palette. No commercial vehicles parked overnight. Trash bins could only be visible from 6 in the morning to 8 in the evening on collection day. Detailed, controlling, but technically legal. For the first few months, nothing happened. I kept the yard trimmed, the house neutral, the routine predictable. Then the first violation letter showed up. It cited my SUV. According to Linda, it violated the commercial vehicle clause. The SUV wasn't marked. No logos. No decals. Just a standard black vehicle issued by the federal government. She claimed it, projected an official presence, and made neighbors uncomfortable. I knocked on her door that evening. "It's government issued," I explained calmly. "It's not commercial." She smiled like I just complimented her outfit. "Our bylaws don't make exceptions for federal optics," she said smoothly. "If it appears official, it falls under the clause." That sentence stuck in my mind. I could have fought it immediately, but Claire squeezed my hand when we got home. "It's not worth starting something," she said quietly. She was right, at least at the time. The fine was minor. I paid it and parked the SUV in the garage when possible. I thought that would satisfy her. It didn't. Over the next several weeks, the letters multiplied. One claimed our trash can had been visible 16 minutes past the allowed window. Another cited our American flag bracket being mounted 1 inch above recommended height. Then there was a complaint about my security camera facing too close to shared visual property. Each notice felt smaller than the last. Petty, nitpicky, almost strategic. It wasn't about compliance. It was about establishing dominance. Neighbors began acting differently. Conversations cut short when I approached, eyes darting toward Linda's house before answering simple questions. The entire street moved with the quiet tension of people who didn't want attention drawn to them. Linda had built something more than an HOA. She had built quiet fear. Then came the sticker. I returned home one afternoon to find a bright orange notice slapped across my garage door. PNDMG NMPLINC RVW. According to the attached letter, the board had reasonable suspicion of unregistered operational activity. Inside my garage, operational activity. I read that line twice. My garage held a vehicle, storage bins, and locked equipment cases tied to my work. Nothing illegal, nothing visible from the street, nothing within HOA jurisdiction. I sent a written response requesting clarification and legal justification for inspection authority. No reply. Instead, I received a follow-up email scheduling what she called a compliance entry for the following week, not a request, a notice. It stated that failure to cooperate would result in escalating fines and community enforcement measures. That was the moment everything became clear. Linda didn't see boundaries. She saw resistance as defiance, and defiance to her demanded escalation. Claire was shaken when she read the notice. "She can't just walk into our house," she said. "No," I answered calmly. "She can't." But Linda didn't operate on what she could do. She operated on what no one had stopped her from doing yet. And for the first time since moving to Oak Hollow Estates, I understood something with complete clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a test. And she had no idea what line she was about to cross. 3 days after Linda posted the compliance entry notice, I was 2 counties away finishing up an assignment that had already stretched longer than expected. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray Tennessee day where the sky feels heavy. I was sitting in my vehicle reviewing notes when my phone started vibrating nonstop. At first, I ignored it. Group notifications from Oak Hollow had become background noise, neighbors debating fence stains and mailbox screws. Then I saw the word, Live in Oak Hollow Estates community. Live now. My stomach tightened. I tapped it. The video opened on my driveway. The camera was shaky at first, then steadied. Linda stepped into frame wearing a navy blazer instead of her usual pastel cardigans. Beside her stood 2 members of the so-called community patrol, retirees in matching navy polos with gold badges that read, Compliance Officer. They looked more like mall security than anything official, but they stood stiffly, trying to project authority. Linda smiled into the phone like she was about to cut a ribbon at a grand opening. "Good afternoon, neighbors," she began brightly. "Today we are demonstrating transparency in action. Residents have a right to know when bylaws are being enforced." My pulse slowed instead of quickened. When situations escalate, panic wastes time. She turned the camera toward my front door. As previously documented, This property has refused compliance regarding unauthorized operational activity. Under Emergency Compliance Authority, we are entering the home. Emergency Compliance Authority. There is no such thing. The Livestream chat scrolled rapidly. Some neighbors posted clapping emojis. Others typed, "Is this legal?" And, "Shouldn't the police be there?" Linda ignored them. One of the volunteers knocked once, half-heartedly, like it was theater. Then he looked at her. She nodded. And they forced the door. The crack of splintering wood came through my phone speaker, sharp and unmistakable. Claire's voice echoed faintly from inside. Startled, confused. My jaw clenched, but my breathing stayed even. They stepped into my living room as if they were conducting a home tour. Observe the excessive surveillance equipment. One volunteer said, gesturing toward the security system panel. Multiple locked containers. The other added, pointing toward my office door. Linda narrated everything with calm confidence. We have reason to believe community standards are being compromised. Claire appeared briefly on camera, pale but standing firm. You can't be in here, she said, her voice steady despite the shock. Linda tilted her head sympathetically. We're authorized by the association. This will only take a moment. Authorized by the association, I watched them move down the hallway toward my home office. My office door was locked. That didn't stop them. One volunteer forced it open, while Linda held the camera steady, narrating like a news correspondent. Inside that office closet were secured cases, locked, labeled, and protected under federal guidelines. They weren't decorative storage bins. They contained active case materials tied to ongoing investigations. Legally stored, legally protected, untouchable without warrant or federal authorization. Linda crouched in front of one of the locked containers. This appears to be unregistered equipment, she said. One of the volunteers grabbed a pry tool from his belt. I felt a shift inside my chest, not fear, not anger. Calculation. The lock snapped. Linda lifted the lid and held the contents up toward the Livestream camera. Documents. Evidence files. Sealed packets clearly marked with federal insignia. The chat exploded. What is that? Are those government papers? This doesn't look right. In that moment, everything changed. This was no longer an HOA dispute, no longer about trash cans or vehicle optics. She had just interfered with secured federal materials. On camera, broadcasting it herself, I took a slow breath and ended the live stream on my end. Not because I wanted it hidden, but because I had seen enough. My first call went to my direct supervisor. He answered on the second ring. Tell me you're seeing this, I said. A pause. We're pulling the stream now, he replied, voice flat and controlled. Do not engage them directly. Head back. We'll handle jurisdiction. My second call was to Claire. She answered immediately. I'm okay, she said before I could speak. They're going through your office. I know, I replied calmly. Step outside. Do not argue. Do not touch anything. Just step outside and wait. Her breathing was steady, but I could hear the strain underneath. I can't believe they did this. I can, I said quietly, because Linda had been escalating for weeks. Each small violation notice had been a test. Each fine a boundary pushed slightly further. Now she had crossed a line that didn't belong to her. I started the engine and turned the vehicle toward Briar Glen. As I drove, my phone buzzed again. Screenshots. Downloaded clips. Neighbors messaging me privately. One message stood out. I don't think she knows what she just did. No. She didn't. Linda believed she was demonstrating power. Believed she was proving that no one in Oak Hollow was above the bylaws. What she had actually done was document unlawful entry, property damage, and interference with federally protected materials, all in high definition, complete with her own commentary. By the time I hit the county line, Additional calls had been made that I didn't need to personally handle. Processes were already in motion. I didn't feel rage. I felt clarity. Some people abuse authority quietly. Linda had done it publicly. And when you put your own misconduct on display, you remove any doubt about intent. As Briar Glen's exit sign came into view, I thought about something she'd told me the day we met. We believe in standards. So do I. The difference is, mine come with consequences. And she was about to learn that in real time. By the time I reached Briar Glen, the live stream had ended, but the echoes of it lingered. The video was already spreading, shared in hushed messages, forwarded by strangers, watched by too many eyes. Every second of it replayed in my mind as I slowed to a crawl at the driveway. Linda was waiting, leaning casually against the side of the house, her posture effortless, almost theatrical. The doorway behind her had been violated, the lock mangled, the wood splintered, a silent scream of intrusion. Her face broke into a sweet, practiced smile. "Oh, good," she said, voice honeyed, teeth glinting in the fading light. "We were hoping you'd return." I didn't respond. I didn't move faster, didn't flinch. I stepped forward slowly, each footfall deliberate. The air smelled of dust, scorched paper, and the faint tang of adrenaline. Inside, chaos had carved its path. Furniture shoved aside like careless pawns, drawers yanked open, documents strewn across the floor. Anything worth keeping had been examined, disrupted, exposed. Claire stood near the kitchen island, hands trembling slightly but her body intact. She had been home during the entry, ordered to stand aside during inspection, though the words still rang cruelly in her ears. She hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't tried to resist. Her wide eyes flickered to me, silently asking if I would make it right. That was the instant the balance shifted. "You broke federal containment," I said evenly, the words cutting through the tension like a scalpel. Linda laughed, a sound that was light, almost musical but edged with something brittle. "This is HOA jurisdiction," she said, tilting her head, as if I had mistaken my authority for hers. Her calm was rehearsed, as though she had anticipated this confrontation hundreds of times in her mind. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my credentials, holding them out without a word. The golden letters and embossed emblem caught, the last rays of sun, glinting like a warning. Her smile faltered. The carefully constructed mask cracked, and for the first time, it seemed real fear touched her face. Her eyes darted to the emblem, then back to me, trying to reconcile what she saw with what she thought she knew. "You're what exactly?" she asked, tight betraying a pulse of panic beneath the practiced sweetness. "Federal enforcement," I said simply. No explanations, no justifications, just the authority I carried. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, until it was broken by a distant wail. At first, I thought it was part of the wind, but then I realized it was sirens, not the shrill wails of local police, not the timid blare of neighborhood patrols. These were professional, precise, and closing in fast. Federal. Linda's posture shifted. Her hands that had been casually crossed over her chest twitched, betraying tension. Her eyes flitted to every exit, every window, every potential route of escape. The confidence she had worn like armor evaporated in the face of consequences far beyond her control. I stepped further inside, careful not to touch anything. The remnants of chaos lay in stark contrast to the order I represented. The room smelled of fear now, not just dust and disruption. Claire's gaze stayed fixed on me, relief flickering in her expression, a fragile glimmer amidst the wreckage. "You thought you could get away with this," I said, voice low, resonant, carrying weight. "You thought jurisdiction meant immunity. You underestimated how far your reach doesn't go." Linda's breathing became more audible, shallow, punctuated by the occasional swallow. The walls seemed to close in, though the house itself hadn't changed. It was the power dynamic that shifted, irreversible. You always had a choice, I continued, pacing slowly, letting each word land with precision. You could have cooperated. You could have warned Claire. But you gambled on your control, on fear, on deception, and it caught up with you. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The warmth, the charm, the casual menace, all replaced by calculation, desperation, the fraying edges of someone realizing the game was over. Sirens grew louder, more insistent. Their proximity was a drumbeat in the quiet chaos, a prelude to containment, to justice. I could see her mind working, weighing options that no longer existed. There were no allies here, no loopholes, only the certainty of accountability. I paused near the kitchen island, close enough that Claire could step forward without obstruction. Claire's hand brushed against mine in silent solidarity, a quiet anchor amidst the storm. She didn't speak, but her presence reinforced the gravity of the moment. You wanted control, I said, almost softly now. But control isn't about intimidation. It's about responsibility. And right now, you have neither. Linda swallowed again, the sound sharp in the quiet. Her eyes met mine, wide, calculating, searching for a path that wasn't there. Then the first federal vehicle rounded the corner, lights slicing through the dusk. The realization hit her fully, and the tension snapped like a taut wire. The smile that had been her shield, her weapon, her mask, vanished. And in that instant, I knew the tide had turned. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble. This was far beyond HOA letters, fines, or petty power plays. This was reckoning. I stood still, letting the moment stretch, letting her understand the gulf she had crossed. The sirens sang a song of inevitability. Behind her, the evidence lay bare, the chaos undeniable. And ahead, enforcement waited. The house, once a symbol of her dominion, had become a cage of exposure, a testament to miscalculation. And as she realized the weight of what she had done, the irony was sharp. The very authority she had flaunted was now the one poised to dismantle her carefully constructed empire. And just like that, the world she had manipulated so deftly turned cold, clinical, and absolute. The smile had faded. The consequences hadn't yet arrived, but they were coming. The lesson, the reckoning, the exposure, it all waited just beyond the threshold. And nothing, not fear, not charm, not deceit could change it now. The sirens grew louder. The first lights reflected off shattered glass. The game was over. Linda would learn that control is never absolute. Authority, when backed by truth and power, is. And in that house, the echoes of misjudgment would reverberate for a long, unforgiving time. The smile had faded, but the story was just beginning. The clubhouse smelled of polished wood and recycled tension. 2 days had passed since the livestream went viral, but the memory of it lingered in hushed whispers and anxious glances. Linda called the emergency HOA meeting under the guise of clarifying misinformation, but the nervous energy in the room betrayed the thin veneer of authority she tried to project. Rows of folding chairs were packed shoulder to shoulder with residents, volunteers, and curious neighbors. The fluorescent lights hummed above, bouncing off the glossy brochures and printed bylaws stacked on the front table. Linda positioned herself at the podium, clutching her papers like armor. She spoke fast, words spilling over one another, attempting to cement her narrative of community authority and compliance. Her voice was sharp, practiced. Each phrase was meant to inspire obedience, trust, fear. Our homeowners association operates under established guidelines, she said, sweeping the room. We maintain order. We ensure safety. And we act in accordance with bylaws approved by the community. Murmurs of agreement floated briefly through the room, the faithful nodding along. But tension crackled beneath the surface, a silent electricity waiting to erupt. Then the doors opened. 2 federal investigators stepped inside, professional, deliberate, each carrying a heavy projector case. Their presence was quiet, but it carried the weight of inevitability. Conversation halted mid-sentence. Eyebrows rose. Gasps, nervous shuffles, and the soft click of seats rearranging filled the sudden silence. They set up without ceremony. The projector hummed to life, casting a crisp, white rectangle on the wall. One of the agents spoke, calm, precise, commanding without aggression. "We are here to present publicly available footage," he announced, voice carrying across the room. "This is evidence of recent actions that require clarity." A subtle shift passed through the crowd. Curiosity mingled with apprehension. Eyes darted to Linda, who froze mid-sentence, the papers in her hand suddenly brittle. She opened her mouth, but no words emerged. The authority she had wielded so confidently faltered under the weight of what was about to unfold. Then it began. Her own voice filled the room, clear and undeniable, pulled directly from the livestream. "We are entering under emergency authority," she had said, calm, commanding, or so she thought at the time. The words echoed through the speakers, resonating in the chest of every person present. Gasps punctuated the room like the crack of a whip. Eyes widened, hands went to mouths. Even the volunteers, who had once followed her instructions, now shifted uncomfortably, realizing that the truth they had witnessed, recorded, and shared had become unavoidable. Then came the images, her prying open secured containers, the careful disruption of documents, the blatant overreach captured frame by frame. Every motion was visible, every infraction undeniable. The footage was unembellished, unfiltered, objective. No commentary, no interpretation, just raw truth. The air changed instantly. The room, once full of nods, murmurs, and polite attention, now simmered with shock, disbelief, and a dawning awareness. Linda's carefully constructed authority crumbled with every frame. The narrative she had tried to control was no longer hers to manipulate. Residents leaned forward, whispering to neighbors, pointing discreetly. Eyes that had once looked to her for guidance now scanned her face for explanation. She attempted to speak, words fumbling over one another, staccato and incoherent. "Community, authority, guidelines," she stammered, but the footage spoke louder than any defense. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. The collective realization was inescapable. She had misrepresented her actions, and the evidence existed for all to see. The agents observed quietly, hands folded, expressions neutral. They didn't need to interject. Their presence alone, coupled with the undeniable video, conveyed accountability in a way no argument could counter. Linda, once a figure of dominance, now looked small and exposed, her confidence dissipated like smoke. The truth doesn't argue, it asserts. And in that room, it asserted itself in brilliant, unrelenting clarity. Residents' whispers grew louder, the energy of realization spreading like wildfire. The volunteers shifted uneasily, faces pale, understanding their complicity had been documented. Claire, seated near the back, exhaled softly, a relief barely contained in her expression. Linda's eyes darted around, searching for allies, searching for a way to salvage authority. But it was gone. Control was no longer hers. The footage had rewritten the story in real time, stripping away pretense, charm, and coercion. By the time the agents shut off the projector, the room had transformed completely. The balance of power had shifted irrevocably. Linda, once the orchestrator of compliance, now faced a community armed with undeniable evidence. Her own voice, meant to justify and assert, had betrayed her. No one cheered, no one jeered. But the collective weight of understanding, of truth recognized, pressed heavily in the air. The emergency meeting had become a reckoning. Authority, I realized, is only as strong as its foundation in truth. Deception, manipulation, and overreach crumble when confronted by clarity, especially when that clarity is documented, public, and immutable. Linda's gaze fell, defeated, scanning the faces of those she had tried to control. The agents collected their equipment without ceremony, leaving behind an unspoken command: the truth had been presented, the documentation preserved, and the consequences inevitable. The residents left the clubhouse slowly, murmuring in clusters, processing what they had seen. Every glance back at Linda, every whispered confirmation to a neighbor, reinforced the simple, undeniable fact: control is fleeting, evidence is eternal. By the time the doors closed behind the last attendee, Linda stood alone at the podium. Her printed bylaws lay scattered like confetti, meaningless against the weight of what had been revealed. The truth had spoken, and nothing, not charm, not authority, not fear, could undo it. The emergency meeting ended, but its impact reverberated long after. The power of documentation, the clarity of evidence, and the inevitability of accountability had been made unmistakably clear. And in that quiet, shattering moment, the balance had shifted forever. Within a week, everything unraveled. Linda's resignation arrived like a note dropped from a collapsing sky, formal, brief, and empty of the authority it once carried. The envelope contained no justifications, no explanations, only the acknowledgement that her control, carefully cultivated over years, had been rendered obsolete. The HOA board moved quickly, initiating an internal review. Meetings that had once been routine or perfunctory now became tense affairs of accountability. Policies were scrutinized, logs examined, and past decisions dissected under the unblinking lens of hindsight. The very structures she had used to project control were turned inward, exposing weaknesses and inconsistencies that no charm or intimidation could cover. The so-called community patrol, the network of volunteers who had once followed her instructions unquestioningly, was quietly disbanded. Its members shuffled away, faces pale, unsure how to navigate a neighborhood now free from a hierarchy they had once feared and obeyed. The illusion of power, maintained through orders and oversight, had vanished. What remained was nothing: an empty title, hollow protocols, a shell of authority without influence. Civil attorneys reached out, their letters precise, formal, reminding me of liability, responsibilities, and protection under the law. They were cautious, meticulous, yet their tone carried an undercurrent of inevitability, as if the events had long been set in motion. The county prosecutor reviewed charges related to unlawful entry, interference, and tampering, turning what had been perceived as petty HOA disputes into matters of legal consequence. Every action, every decision, every misstep was cataloged, cross-referenced, and assessed. Linda became a ghost in her own neighborhood. The last time I saw her, she stood at the mailbox cluster, clutching her keys as if they could anchor her to some remaining thread of relevance. Her eyes avoided mine completely, the practiced gaze of control replaced by a flicker of self-preservation and shame. Conversation, once dominated by her narrative, her charm, her coercion, was now impossible. Neighbors passed by with subtle nods, polite smiles, or deliberate avoidance. The woman who had dictated what could be said, when it could be said, and to whom, now hid behind the ordinary mundanity of daily routine. Her power had not been wrested from her. No courtroom drama or public humiliation had dismantled her physically. It dissolved. Slowly, quietly, and irreversibly. The foundation she had built, fear, influence, narrative control, had been eroded by something she could not manipulate: transparency and accountability. The live stream, the documentation, the public record had done what confrontation could not. Her authority evaporated because the environment that had supported it no longer existed. Conversations that had once required her approval or involvement now flowed freely. Decisions that had been filtered through her interpretations of rules were made openly, debated honestly, and executed without delay. The HOA, stripped of its dominant personality, became procedural, neutral, and accountable, a reflection of governance rather than spectacle. Even the volunteers, once eager to enforce her will, now approached their duties with caution, informed by the clarity of what had occurred. They were no longer pawns in a performance, but witnesses and participants in a system learning to function without coercion. Fear had been replaced by clarity, intimidation by precedent, and compliance by choice. Linda's avoidance was emblematic. The neighborhood no longer reacted to her presence, no longer deferred to her opinion. Spaces she once dominated, the clubhouse, the newsletter, the casual gatherings, were now arenas of ordinary interaction, free from the manipulation she had exerted. The dissolution of her power was not loud or dramatic. It was a slow, inexorable fade, a quiet undoing that left her isolated, irrelevant, and carefully observed by a community learning the boundaries of authority and accountability. Even casual glances toward her now carried weight, a reminder of the fragility of influence built on perception rather than legitimacy. She moved through the neighborhood like a shadow of her former self, each step a testimony to the emptiness of control when stripped of transparency and evidence. I watched it unfold without satisfaction or malice, simply as an acknowledgement of consequence. Linda had been confronted by forces larger than her HOA bylaws, larger than her charisma, larger than the casual compliance of neighbors. Her undoing was procedural, meticulous, inevitable. Power had its limits, truth, documentation, and accountability did not. By the end of that week, the neighborhood had settled into a new rhythm. Letters were addressed with clarity, meetings were conducted openly, disputes resolved without theatrics. The collapse of a single figurehead had shifted the culture entirely, creating space for reason, fairness, and ordinary order to flourish. Linda remained a presence in name only, a cautionary figure of hubris and overreach. The woman who once dictated the pace, tone, and content of every interaction had become invisible, relegated to her own quiet observation of the world. She could no longer command. Her power wasn't forcibly taken. It wasn't challenged directly in a dramatic confrontation or a public trial. It dissolved, evaporating under the unrelenting light of transparency and accountability. And in its place rose a simple truth: authority, when disconnected from legitimacy, cannot endure. The neighborhood moved on. The files, the footage, the evidence, all preserved, stood as reminders of what had been and what could not return. Linda's reign ended not with a bang, but with the silence of irrelevance. The collapse was complete. Oak Hollow Estates felt different now. The streets that had once been quiet with forced compliance now carried the subtle hum of community. Conversations no longer whispered, glances no longer cautious. In the wake of the chaos, the neighborhood had begun to breathe again. Change arrived not with fanfare, but with steady, deliberate action. Bylaws were rewritten, precise and unambiguous, designed to prevent unauthorized entry under any circumstances. No loopholes, no gray areas, no room for personal interpretation or overreach. Every resident could now see clearly where authority began and where it ended. The documents, once wielded as instruments of intimidation, became shields for safety and fairness. A third-party management company was brought in, neutral, professional, and untethered from the personalities that had dominated the HOA before. Their presence was not intrusive, but it carried the weight of impartiality. Meetings were structured, transparent, and procedural. Decisions were debated openly, and residents could voice concerns without fear of reprisal. The invisible walls of intimidation that had divided neighbors for years were dismantled, replaced with clear communication and accountability. Conversations grew more candid. Residents who had remained silent, who had nodded along out of habit or fear, began to speak. Some admitted they had felt intimidated for years, trapped in a web of rules enforced selectively, dictated by whim rather than principle. Others expressed relief that the neighborhood now functioned as a true community, not a stage for one person's authority. Claire replaced the front door, a symbol of security and renewal. The old door, scarred and violated, had been a reminder of intrusion and control. The new door stood sturdy, functional, and unadored, a testament to reclaimed boundaries. I installed reinforced locks as well, not out of fear, but principle. They were a statement authority exists, but only with respect for limits, law, and community trust. The live stream that had once humiliated, exposed, and threatened our sense of privacy had ultimately restored balance. What had seemed like a violation became an instrument of justice, a clarifying lens that illuminated truth, accountability, and consequence. The irony was not lost on me. The very visibility Linda had craved had been her undoing. She had sought recognition, compliance, and dominion. In seeking visibility, she had left a record of overreach, arrogance, and misjudgment. Her authority had evaporated under the light she herself had invited, proving that transparency can be a formidable equalizer. The neighborhood's collective memory preserved the lesson. Control enforced through fear is fragile, clarity enforced through evidence is enduring. Even small gestures reflected the new order. Neighbors greeted each other without hesitation. Meetings ended with actionable plans rather than silent acquiescence. Notices were posted clearly, understood universally, and enforced fairly. The subtle balance of trust and structure replaced the previous regime's tension and uncertainty. In my own home, the aftermath became routine rather than crisis. Locks checked, doors reinforced, documents secured. I no longer needed to watch every shadow or hesitate at every knock. The community, strengthened by the lessons of transparency and accountability, created its own security, not through fear but through shared responsibility. Claire moved freely now, smiling more, speaking more openly. Her sense of safety had been restored, her home no longer a theater for power plays. What had once been a site of violation now symbolized resilience and order. The HOA meetings, once battlegrounds of dominance, became forums for discussion and problem-solving. Volunteers contributed without coercion, residents participated without fear, and decisions reflected the collective rather than the whims of one. The culture had shifted fundamentally, from control to collaboration. I often thought back to the live stream, the moment Linda's own words and actions had become undeniable evidence. The footage had done more than prove misconduct. It had catalyzed reform, redefined accountability, and rebuilt the community from a foundation of honesty. Linda faded into the background, a ghost of the authority she had once wielded. Her attempts to manipulate, intimidate, and control were rendered meaningless. She existed now only as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power is exercised without accountability or respect. The lesson was clear: visibility is a double-edged sword. Those who crave it must be willing to withstand it. Linda had sought attention and control, but the same attention that promised validation delivered accountability instead. Her visibility ended her authority. Oak Hollow Estates, in contrast, had emerged stronger, clearer, and more united. Trust replaced fear, transparency replaced deception, and community replaced hierarchy. Every reinforced door, every rewritten bylaw, every open conversation was a reminder of the delicate balance between authority and accountability, and of the enduring power of truth. The neighborhood had been rebuilt, not in the shadow of fear, but in the light of clarity. Order had returned, steady and deliberate, and it was stronger than any one person could ever impose. Linda's reign had ended, but the principles she had violated endured. Visibility, accountability, and transparency had won. The balance was restored. The authority of one had dissolved, and the power of the many had risen. Oak Hollow Estates was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a community. I've dealt with criminals who understood the law better than some HOA presidents. The difference is accountability. Real authority comes with limits, oversight, and responsibility. Fake authority hides behind clipboards, bylaws, and carefully curated Facebook live streams. Linda thought she was protecting property values. Instead, she broadcast her own overreach to the entire community. I didn't win because I'm federal. I won because the truth was recorded. Because sometimes, that's all it takes. Proof that cannot be denied, shared with everyone, and preserved for history. It's a reminder that control without accountability is fragile, and transparency is more powerful than fear. The lesson isn't just for HOA dramas. It's for any situation where someone tries to assert power without responsibility. If you want to hear more true stories like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button to HOA Gone Wild. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I want to hear your stories too. Your neighborhood, your street, your community, it might be next. And sometimes all it takes is truth.